Dudes, it's Quam. I'm going to do a video today on a trigger job for Ruger 1022. You see a lot of videos on installing chimneys and shit like that. Or dudes that do light polish jobs and shit, but they don't ever really affect characteristics, parameters of the trigger. And so I wanted to do a video on my trigger job that I did on my 1022 that reduces creep, gives you a nice crisp trigger pull with zero over travel, or very minimal amount of over travel, just enough to be reliable. This is a stock 1022, safety checked, yada yada. Okay, so you have slight take up in this trigger, very little. Let me make sure the focus is correct here. And then you have a bit of creep, then the brake, and the over travel following. You'll see how much the trigger travels here. So creep, brake, and over travel. Once again, slight creep, brake, and over travel. It's not a bad trigger, stock. Okay. This is my trigger job. Let's see here. Okay, so a little bit more take up. So I've moved the point of sear contact back further, which means that there's less creep, almost zero creep, just enough to be reliable. Okay, and then brake and over travel. You see how much less the trigger travels there. Even just taking the over travel out will help the trigger pull a lot. But I'm kind of snobby about triggers, so I like to take out as much creep as possible. Let me just make sure you can see the shit. Okay, so creep, brake, and over travel. Okay. The reset is short as fuck as well. Very short reset. Okay, I'll show you the stock again. Alright. So you can see that the reset is definitely longer on the factory trigger. Okay. Creep, brake, and over travel. And reset. Alright. Okay, we'll take these fuckers apart and show you what I did. Alright. As you can see from this explosion of parts, I've detail stripped both 1022s. I figure if you need instructions on taking the thing apart to this point, then you probably should not be attempting a trigger job anyways. Also, as a disclaimer, if you fucking try this shit and you break your gun or shoot yourself or shoot somebody else, do not blame me. I'm telling you that if you don't understand the principles of sear engagement and how to like double check, make sure your shit's good before you fire it, then you probably should not be attempting something this advanced. You can put the barreled actions aside. There's no need to do anything to those. The main two parts you deal with are the hammer and the sear. And to do a proper trigger job, of course, you're going to do some polishing as well. As you can see here. Let's see here. This guy and this guy. This is something that's pretty important for good trigger feel. These are the trigger return spring detents. And this is the factory one, black. You see that I've taken mine, polished the shit out of it, and I also polished the hole that the detent goes inside of. That bottom guy right there. It's hard as fuck to get in there and do a decent polish job, so you just do the best you can by using sandpaper rolled up somehow around a punch or something, increasing the grits to get pretty fine, and then maybe use like mother's polish or some shit like that on a Q-tip. Okay, but the main pieces that you fuck with in order to really change your trigger parameters are your sear, and hammer. I'll show you the hammer first. You know, I've gone through and also polished like these edges here. Let me get something to point. This flat edge, it's hard to tell that it's polished now in the camera, but it is, because that rides against the trigger housing. So you want to smooth that bitch out. And I've also polished this surface here around the sear. It's hard to tell on the camera. It looks like it's all scratched up, but it's actually pretty fucking smooth. So these are small parts with small adjustments, so it's going to be really hard to tell. It's going to be really hard to tell. Now that I'm putting it on camera, you can't barely tell the difference at all. The adjustment takes place. Sorry, it's so shaky. Along this edge. Okay, this is your sear engagement surface here. And here. You're reducing that by stoning this here, and you want to round it, of course. You don't want to like just cut a flat surface on it. You want to try to follow the contour, but reduce it. That way, the amount of, you can see, maybe, it's really hard to pick this shit up on camera here. When you get this shit apart, if you've shot the gun any number of times, you'll see that there's going to be wear marks right along this surface. And that'll be the wear of your sear catching and sliding off, catching and sliding off. So that will be an indication of how much of this surface the sear generally uses. And you can see when you look at it from this angle that you might can tell. Let me back up a little bit, that might help. You might can tell that this one is slightly shorter this way than this one is. I'm talking about thousandths of an inch here. So when you do this, you better get real fucking good at assembling and disassembling your trigger group, because you're going to do it a bunch of fucking times. You're going to take a little bit off and then put it all back together and test it. Take a little bit more off if you need to, put it back together and test it. This shit takes forever, but that's any trigger job. The faster and more efficiently you can move in assembling and reassembling, the faster your trigger jobs become. So I generally don't really show like a how-to step-by-step on trigger jobs, because I assume if you're going to attempt it, then you kind of know what the fuck you're doing anyways. But you know, you stone around this radius to take down the amount of sear engagement surface on the hammer. Do something very similar to the sear, but not nearly as drastic. This will be even harder to see because this is an even smaller adjustment. The adjustment is on these little hooks. Okay, so they meet up to the hammer, full cock notch of the hammer that we talked about a minute ago, and this is your sear notch. They match like that. And then the sear pulls away when you pull the trigger and allows the hammer to swing forward. Okay, like this. So to reduce creep, you need to firstly make this slightly shorter and make this slightly shorter. But here you're not really reducing mechanical creep, you're reducing sensible creep. So you just, it's kind of hard to see this shit. If you can see, you can't even really tell. But here you've got a tall-ish ledge right here. And here you can see that it's slightly shorter. But I didn't take it off by stoning at an angle like this. I just made it less sensible creep, which means I just cut the nipple off. Cut the nipple off. And you have to make that very sharp. You do not want it to be rounded, because that will make your trigger less crisp. The sharper you can make this edge and this edge right here, this one can shave material off of your fingernail. This is some AGI shit. They always say you want your sear and your hammer edges to be so sharp that you can just shave material off of your fingernail with it. So you polish up the trigger return detent. You polish up any parts that touch metal on the hammer, the trigger, and the sear. You also want to polish up. I mean, obviously, if you have a plastic hammer, plastic trigger, it's not going to be of any significance. But the parts on the hammer that pivot and rotate, and that these other parts are going to touch, you get them nice and smooth. And then all you have left to deal with is your over travel. Which, like I said before, if you just take over travel out, it'll increase the feel of your trigger tremendously. But me, I like to have a real crisp trigger with very little creep. Especially on this, because it's not like a hunting rifle to me. It's just for fucking around with. And this is your over travel stop. So what you do is you drill a hole in the back of the trigger guard. You want to do it. You want to have the trigger in there and mounted with the pins so that you know whereabouts on the back of the trigger that fucker is going to touch. You know, you don't want to just go in there haphazardly. You want to make sure that it touches where you want it to touch. And then you tap it and you put a small bolt in there. And you can adjust the length either by, well, the best way is going to be to cut the bolt to length. So start with an extra long bolt and then cut little bits of it at a time, just with grinding wheel or something like that, or file, until it's short enough to where your trigger will actually release the hammer, but not travel any further past that. And that is how you do an at-home trigger job. If you've already got stones and shit, then fuck, man, it's free. The only other thing that I did was reduce power springs. I think I got a spring and shim kit off eBay for like $30. So it comes with a bunch of shims that you can put between the hammer and the housing, and the trigger and the housing, in order to take out side-to-side slop in the trigger, side-to-side play. Make it a little bit tighter feeling, less creepy feeling, and the more aligned you can get your sear angles, the less creep you're going to feel. And I can't stress enough how important it is to keep your edges fucking straight. Don't round them off. Don't stone one side more than the other. You gotta know what you're doing. And of course, practice makes perfect. So if you're gonna try it on a gun, then 1022 is a great gun to learn on. Just buy some extra parts to have around, just in case you fuck something up. You can try again. And do yourself a favor. If you're a gun guy, do some research. Find out what the fuck sear engagement means. Find out how to affect different parts of your trigger parameters by changing the dimensions of your components. Learn about what it means, to have creep or to have less creep. If you don't know these things, maybe I'll do a video some other time about the stages of the trigger. But I would like to promote people doing their own shit. So, DIY 1022 trigger job done at home with just some stones and a shitload of patience.